Welcome to another This Week in Coworking Discussion.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast feed. Today we have a very exciting and interesting episode dropping in on a Wednesday. By the time you hear this or watch this, you should definitely switch to the video version. These two gentlemen would have stepped off stage here at GCUC in New York. I'm joined today by Sam Rosen and Peter Kolaczynski. How are you both doing today?
What's up, Hector? Thank you for having us today.
Great, Hector.
Great to be here. I'm actually in your offices. We're in three different offices because this is the world of technology we live in. But we are in the Yardi offices here in New York to share a pretty interesting thing that you guys have just introduced to the co-working world, as I said, here on stage. Instead of me telling people what it is that you guys are releasing, give us the one-line spiel of what is the Coworking Index.
The one-line spiel. Oh man, this is the first time we've had to come up with a one-line spiel. You know, on the site we say it's a flexible workspace operator analytics, and that's what it is.
To me, we've been collecting this data for a long time, Hector, and now it's being able to make it public and put it out there.
I love that. And it's part of the Coworking Cafe brand. And before we dive any further into that, you are both no strangers to co-working data. If you've been listening to this podcast or been reading the newsletter, you've seen data drops from Coworking Cafe before. But this is something completely new that is being rolled out. But before we dive into what it is and showing people what it can do, Peter, you've not been on the podcast before. Do you want to just tell people what it is you do at Yardi? And don't just say stuff. What is it you like to geek out about?
Yeah, I'm the director of commercial real estate data. And I've been working with traditional for a long time and gathering listings and identifying the footprint of office space across the U.S. And within the last handful of years, we decided to apply those same methodologies and practices to co-working and identify all the co-working locations and square footage and come up with some interesting numbers and some stats on market saturation.
I've always had this question when we have been doing kind of the Coworking Cafe data drops, whether it's just from the Coworking Cafe database of listings. But what you're saying is it's actually not. There is a team who goes out and fetches and researches and collects this data, right?
Yeah, it's separate. The numbers don't match up. Right? There's a handful of reasons for that, but yeah, it's all different from that.
And obviously, Sam, you've been on the podcast before. Great to have you back here. What is your official title these days?
I'm an industry principal here at Yardi, Hector. But one of the cool things is I've been at Yardi now for about over a year, and it's a really interesting company. And I remember one of the last times we were joining the company. One of the things that I've learned that's been really, really exciting about Yardi is what Peter does and what the research team is able to do. And being somewhat of like an industry veteran, as an operator, as a marketplace, as someone in the industry who's just very passionate about the future of work and how that's going. Getting into Yardi, one of the things that was really compelling to me was the data that we collect. And like, you know, Peter's leads a team. There are hundreds and hundreds of people who do first party research. And Yardi's just uniquely situated to have the resources and the interest and to not only research data specific around co-working. So this is supply data. What are the spaces? How big are they? When did they join? Have they changed? But also because of Yardi's position in the broader office and real estate industry, we actually have the underpinning data, the denominator of how much office there is in a given market, right? And that is really, really compelling, is not just knowing how many co-working spaces, and with so many that are joining the market, knowing how much office space there is in a given market and being able to glean data from that is something that I think Yardi is very uniquely positioned to be able to do and provide insights around.
That's awesome.
We say denominator a lot, Hector, and having that underlying information to go off of and set the benchmark too across the country of how much office data we have and the square footage behind that data aligns really well with the second step we did, which is identifying all the co-working locations and the sizes behind that.
That's really interesting. And so before we dive into it, you have said data about 5 times. So should we actually have a look at the screen and see what people will see when they get to the Coworking Index? So I log on. Show us what is the first thing that I can do as an operator.
One of the things that's neat about this is that we've really tried to take this data that we have, that we share quarterly, and not only make it available and updated on a monthly basis, but really make it dynamic and give you the ability to play with the data and kind of observe the data. And I know, Hector, you've been doing this a long time. It's really actually quite interesting, the insights that you find when you start plugging into the data and playing with it. So you come to the site, right? You see a couple top level things. You see the total number of locations, and we are tracking just the United States in this index right now. You show what that equates to in the amount of co-working square feet. And then you have this number, which I think is really a critical number for the industry, that we talk about a lot, and it's this co-working percentage. And essentially that is how much co-working inventory is there as part of the broader office industry portfolio of real estate in the United States. So that's the top line numbers you see. We've been tracking this data in this format now for about 7 months. So what you'll see how this all compares to March, but you can go back all the way to October and you can compare the data set, from April is our last month to October. And you can see, for example, there's 8% more total locations of co-working space in the United States since October of 2025.
Yeah, 8%. I was looking at it yesterday. It's 700 new locations, and it's like 10 million square feet since we started tracking, which is only 7 months ago.
Are you guys going to go back and kind of backdate some of the data, or is this kind of from October 2025 onwards?
So we've been collecting it for longer, and I'd say in its existing form, it took a while for us to structure it and organize it by market and by submarket. And the plan is going forward on a monthly basis to update the website.
That's awesome. And is it going to be like kind of end of month? Like, when can people train themselves to kind of log back in and track change?
It's a good question. I think we shoot for the first 5 to 7 days to have the report over to Sam, and then Sam does his thing and makes it look beautiful, and then he's off and running. So usually the report comes out first couple days of the month.
Cool. All right, so let's dive into some of the deeper data. Obviously, we have the percentage number. We're very far from that 30% number that everyone keeps kind of talking about, but at least we have a trackable metric right now. You did obviously mention that this is US centric right now. Any plans in the future to kind of make it global, or are we focusing on US for the next kind of year?
So I'd say US for now, for sure. I think there is an idea of going global, but what makes this unique and different is having the underpinning office data set, right? Which we don't have globally, right? So that's a different ask. We have some estimations in UK and London, but it's not 81,000 office buildings with the exact square footage of each location. That's not there yet. Yep. So, but I'd say right now it's focused just on the US.
So let's dive into the other fantastic graphs you have on the page. What else can we learn from the Coworking Index?
I think that's what's most interesting, is being able to kind of play with the data to share the story. There are just ways to visualize the data. So here we have a heat map. This heat map shows the 120 submarkets that we track specifically and allows you just to kind of understand general density through most of these graphs. So for example, here, this is the top 10 markets we track in the United States. By the purple is the number of locations, and this like yellow-orange is the amount of square feet. And this is where you start to see kind of interesting insights, like Manhattan by location is not the biggest market, right? It's the 5th biggest market, but by square feet, it is by far the largest market. And when you start to kind of dig into this data and these insights, it's interesting to kind of understand why and how that might affect other markets, both nationally and globally.
Yep. I mean, that's a great way to look at it. And then you've obviously got different views. You can kind of drag it around. I'm seeing you do it now on the screen, being able to kind of readable format as well.
We have a couple ways to visualize the data, and really this is the beginning of something, and it's Yardi's hope to, as we continue to play a role in the industry and we have this wealth of information, it's how do we share this data back to the broader industry, continue to refine the data so that it's useful for people to see, and build a resource that's generally very interesting to people. And really, I think this is just the beginning. So Peter, I'll let you jump in here, but there's some other kind of cool things to look at in just these views.
Yeah, and I think the sub-market level information is something we can get into, which is interesting and unique. You can drill down that specific and see the growth. We'll compare you know, Manhattan has, more than, I think it's 11 times the square footage of Brooklyn, right? And only, 3x or amount of locations. But you break it down a little bit deeper. It's like, okay, well, why is the percentage of Brooklyn so much higher? And we talk about how, and you can see why it's that denominator. And back to that word again, Hector, where when you have that underpinning information, it paints a much broader and much more reasonable picture of what's happening with that market. And I think that's a critical part of this.
Who do you think this is most useful for? Is it mostly for folks who kind of just proving to capital markets that co-working is still is very much a thing, or is it for people kind of looking for new markets to open into or assess competition? Like who is the ideal user of the co-working index?
What do you think, Peter?
I think there's two people to my mind, right? First, it's anybody in the industry who's an operator and is looking to understand their position, relative speaking, to what's happening out there. I think that's important to know and to understand. I think there's a longer term play in educating and helping with tenants understand what's available right now that we'll be getting more and more into. I think our firm belief is you're going to see this co-working world grow significantly over the next 5 to 7 years as tenants demand a different structure and different terms and more flexibility when it comes to them leasing space. So I think it's operators, it's brokers who'll be working with those tenants and those tenants themselves to understand what's out there. And I think it's educating the final piece that'll be very helpful to see the growth in the industry moving forward.
So, is there any charge for anyone to use this, like brokers, reps, members? Is this a gated resource?
Just that email that Sam had to put in, just the old email.
So everyone should just put in Sam's email address. No, don't do that. Actually, put your own email addresses as
Cut
well.
that. No, yeah, I mean that's the point I think is really cool, and Yardi is very supportive of this, which is how do we share back to the industry, both operators, people who write about the industry, analysts who look at the industry, to give just a candid way of observing how things are progressing, these, cultural trends and, that are impacting society, that are impacting the office market, and have a baseline to say, hey, we can correlate activity, or we can correlate changes in our world with this supply, and having a baseline of it. But this is a contribution from Yardi back to the industry. It's really built for the people in the industry that have been building it for the last 15 plus years. And it's the beginning of a conversation. And there's certain information that we can share with the data that we have, and figuring out ways to analyze it. And we'll continue to iterate that and improve it as we get more feedback and the product matures and we learn what's really helpful.
There's a lot going on in the office industry right now, and the fact that co-working is one of the repositioning elements you can have with office buildings. And as you see a destruction of office values continue to happen, right? That's what we're tracking on the research side, is how many buildings are selling at a discount from their last sale, and it's like 60%. There's deals to be made out there. There's points of entry that were previously not possible. And I think that's an exciting thing for the industry too. It's, again, we're not breaking any news when I heard today at the conference, multiple people talk about the UK and talk about London and how that's more or less the path forward. And I think this, to me, is us understanding where the US is in comparison to in significant detail, right? And as the industry understands, okay, this is where we need to move to and this is where we're headed, I think knowing where you are is very valuable. And I think this provides that.
Absolutely. And so obviously everyone's going to go onto this and look at their own home market. Everyone's going to be aroundish 2%, I guess, of market share. Is there any markets that people should definitely explore, even if they're not in that market, just to kind of see the full value of the data set?
I knew he was going to do it, Hector. Here we are in North Central Florida and South Bend, right? So, and there's reasons behind this stuff, right? So you're like, why in the world is North Central Florida 4.2%? 6% or 4.8%, and it's the denominator is small, right? You don't have the industry in North Central Florida, right? We're talking Gainesville, we're talking Daytona Beach, Ocala, right? Ocala's shipping, and Gainesville's a college town, and Daytona Beach is a vacation place, but there's no significant underlying businesses and millions and millions of square feet of office space. So, but still, even that being said, 29 locations, that's pretty neat. Similar situation with South Bend, right? I think that it's a place where people are, and you have the college town piece. Same thing with Charleston as a destination. Brooklyn I mentioned before. And Miami has always outperformed other sizable cities when it comes to co-working. They've always been a leader. So that also wasn't too surprising.
That's interesting. And if we flip out to the other side, like what is the lowest percentage? Just kind of explore that. And we can dig back into Miami in a sec.
We could get really in the weeds here now.
I mean, these are very small markets, right? It's quite interesting to see which markets have the highest penetration of co-working, and according to our data, which markets are not even close. And I think it's to the industry itself to sort of analyze why that is and how to build inventory that actually works in a market, or perhaps certain markets just aren't great markets for flexible workspace today.
I mean, that's just me geeking out.
No, and I appreciate that, Hector. And this goes back to what we were talking about, before when we were just sitting down. Those small percentages, when you start taking a percentage of those percentages, the numbers look a lot bigger than they really are in reality. So it's just something to be aware of. But it's still a lot of green arrows regardless.
And again, it's what the data provides. But if you click each of these at the bottom 3 times, it'll sort by the growth rate. So you can see just which markets in this case have added the most locations in that given time period, and you can do that by square feet. You can do that by co-working percentage.
It's pretty cool.
A note too is so we have our own processes in place to identify these as soon as possible, whether they're opening or closing. But we go through every market in a 3-month cycle, right? So, you might see a month or 2 lag sometimes in some of those smaller markets specifically, but we'll catch it eventually.
Sam, you were digging a little bit into the Miami market, which is pretty hot, one of the most contested markets. Now, obviously, you show spaces, you say that show the amount. It's just kind of a eagle's eye view, right? This is the number of spaces and kind of where they are. You're not really visualizing who runs those spaces, because going back to what Peter was saying, eventually using this for the tenants or the members, they can't really use this to find space, right?
Today, we don't share the specific underlying operator data for a few reasons, but hopefully that this generalized information is quite insightful. We also limit today to the top 25 markets in each of these categories, which is a little dynamic depending on how you click through it.
Got it.
We also share data on a state level, which is a bit interesting, right? So we'll look at a particular state, and you can look at trends, related to that state, submarkets in that specific state, and kind of better understand the dynamics of that fidelity.
And so obviously you're spending a lot of effort and time and resources building these reports, doing the research every month. Outside of the denominator side, is this eventually going to be connected to like the desk passes, Hubbles, co-working cafes of the world, so it's automatically updated, or will it all always be a manual process that Sam and whoever's pulled into Sam's orbit will have to process?
Well, Sam kind of raised his hand. The first time he saw it, I think he's like, dude, what is this? And then he's like, let me play around with it. And we're at our current iteration with this. I think there's going to be always a manual component of it. I don't see it being automated again for a number of different reasons, but I think that's the value. And on Coworking Cafe, and we've had this conversation, and I think we'll have this conversation this week on what is a co-working location. Are we talking about just on-demand locations, right? And the Coworking Index is not, right? Mm-hmm. So on Coworking Cafe, you'll see maybe there's a meeting room in a hotel that's available, right? Or on Deskpass, you'll have that same sort of thing. Sam, and if you want to jump in. But on the Coworking Index, it has to be a branded operator. Mm-hmm. that is more than just an on-demand desk or a standalone booth or something like that.
So we're not going to see WeWork Go Portal pods counting as co-working spaces.
They should not be in here. No airport great. Lounges, none of that stuff.
Got it. Yeah. And so by definition, spec suites, the traditional kind of business centers, do they fall into this co-working category? Because I know this is the big debate across all co-working mediums right now is what falls into co-working and what doesn't. So I'm going to let you guys who have the index, what are you
Well,
defining as, what are the parameters of co-working?
friend of the podcast, Michael Everts, had strong opinions on using co-working as the brand here. But, I think we take a look at this as capital C co-working and really think of it as just the general category altogether. And that it really includes dedicated spaces, on-demand spaces that provide professional co-working space, right? So we do our best to delineate that and take like a broad perspective on the industry, but it's inclusive of global operators. It's inclusive. I mean, one of the most interesting insights of this underlying data is two of the 10 biggest operators in the world on our index are brands that are in-house brands to commercial real estate businesses. Like Tishman's Studio is one of the top 10 operators, in our data set. And I think as the industry expands, as we go from this 2.3% number to what we think is a much more achievable sort of proven number, which is what that London market is, which is closer to 13%. We think about what is the inventory that's going to help fill that gap and help bring this industry sort of the order of magnitude bigger that it is today. And we believe it's going to look a lot like the middle. It's going to be a lot of these traditional landlords and building owners getting into the game and executing space that looks a lot like co-working, smells a lot co-working, and is priced a lot like co-working. And that's really what we're trying to measure here and help, provide insights around.
To add on to that, the flexibility, right? That's going to be the driving force going forward that owners of buildings are going to have to adjust to and meet what the consumer is telling them they have to do, right? And that is the London model already, right? So as we see an emphasis on that, as we see an uptick in that, I think there's going to be some blurring of the lines that on the research side, we're going to have to adjust and understand what that looks like, because the growth to get from 2.3% to that 13% number is going to be a repositioning of existing office space. And we talk about this, what's this called? Is it serviced? Is it turnkey? Is it managed, right? All of this terminology, but that's the growth factor, and that's
Yep.
where we're going to see the biggest increase.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to dig into deeper, but I'm trying to check in the time here, and I know we have to get back to this conference. But one of the things is on the automation, I know like my brain is just going like there are so many ways we could automate this. You could connect it to all these databases. I'm gonna geek out with you guys after the conference with maybe some coffee and or beer and figure that piece out. But with the last part, I know the one question that's nagging me is not all co-working spaces are created equal. There is now this separation between like economy co-working spaces, premium co-working spaces, ultra premium co-working spaces, and membership clubs. Any plans to kind of add a little bit more kind of taxonomy to the numbers as opposed to just everything falling under one category? Because I think that would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, on the research.
There's a lot more research underpinning this, right? And I really want to reemphasize this is the beginning of a conversation. This is the beginning of a product, and this is the beginning of the narrative. And the more we understand what insights are useful and can kind of understand how and where and when we can share that, we will continue. So I think Peter and I both look forward to geeking out over beer and coffee, which we like to do, and talk about this stuff and figure out what, I know as an operator, people always ask about pricing data. That's like a huge vector, right? People care about the type of supply and the size of specific size of supply. So all of that stuff we know is interesting to the industry. And as we continue to evolve, we'll add more insights. And we really want to hear from people to understand what seems wrong, what seems right, what would be helpful, what's not helpful, and let this be the beginning of a cool thing.
And so if people do have had time to check it out and they have feedback, where should people reach out and give feedback about things they want to see?
Talk to Peter. No,
Everybody
just kidding.
Everybody has Sam's email.
Yeah, I mean, I think both Peter and I are easily accessible and love conversations about this. We should probably add like a little comment suggestion bucket in the bottom. So that's a great suggestion, Hector. Hopefully we'll get that up soon. So make it even easier for people to share insights.
Great. And I'll make sure that both of your co-working leader profiles are updated and linked to your LinkedIn. So people can also reach out to you from the show notes or from this Week in Co-working website. Gentlemen, thank you both for sharing this with us, for creating it, and for geeking out with me in the middle of this conference.
Thank you, man. Thanks for all you
We'll
do.
be back. Of course, we'll be back in your podcast feed a few days from now. Gentlemen, take care, and I'll see you on the other side of this camera.
Thanks, Hector.